the efficiency of the pass doubles.
Doubles? They got their own day over the weekend, and they get their own pod today. We're talking tight ends on the SumerSports show this week. The changes we've seen this season with regards to the way that they are used, why teams are changing the ways that they're using tight ends, and what all of this means for tight ends moving forward, the skill sets that they need to have, the ways that we should go about evaluating them. We've got a lot of interesting things to work through. So welcome to the show, Lindsay Rhodes with Sam Bruchhaus, who has been looking at a lot of tight end data this week.
I've been looking at a lot of tight end data this week, Lindsay, and in a week where if you go check out Lindsay's Twitter, she's been right a bunch of times.
Oh, thanks.
This is something that we have been kind of touching on for multiple years, Lindsay. The rise of 12 personnel, the rise of these hybrid bodies, the big skill position. And what better week to discuss exactly how this has looked and how it has impacted the game than National Tight Ends Day?
You know, it's funny. I was watching the games this weekend, and I felt like tight ends were producing more. George Kittle, I think it's a rule that he has to score a touchdown on National Tight Ends Day. It's like his day. Kelsey had a big day. Obviously, Tucker Kraft had the biggest day, literally the biggest fantasy producing day for a tight end of the season so far, 33 points in traditional PPR formats. But you know what's funny, Sam? Week 8, fantasy scoring for tight ends, the lowest scoring week of the entire season. According to SumerBrain, which has a fantasy feature starting today, tight ends scored 351.9 points combined in week 8, dead last on the week, on the year, on a week-by-week basis. Obviously, part of that had to do with the 6 teams that were on a bye by Mageddon. But interestingly, week 5, which featured the most fantasy points for tight ends, the most, nearly 100 points more than this past week, was the week that featured the second lowest number of active tight ends. All of this is to say that tight end scoring was not actually all that voluminous this past week on National Tight Ends Day. It was just more visible maybe. This year, though, has been an entirely different story. Tight end scoring through 8 weeks, again, fantasy scoring, up by 360 points from this time last year. Sam, you have any thoughts on why that might be?
I think if you are following the trends from the draft and then following the trends also from where play callers have been going, we are getting these guys who can come in and immediately impact the team at a receiving role. We think about some of the names that were fantasy relevant this week. Mason Taylor had a touchdown. Aronde Gadsden seems to be an impact player all of a sudden for the Los Angeles Chargers. You got Tyler Warren on what seems to be the best offense in the league, the Indianapolis Colts. He's probably the centerpiece outside of Jonathan Taylor of that offense. And as a result, I think there is an investment from a front office purview into that position, and it's kind of starting to trickle down into the coaching ranks and into what we're seeing on the field as well.
Harold Fannin, another name from the younger crop of players here who's been a pretty consistent producer at that position. I wonder, too, if it doesn't have to do with the thing that we're going to talk about the most in today's show, and that is that tight ends have been on the field at a higher rate than we have seen in years past. And not just like everybody trots out a tight end from, we're talking about like multiple tight ends that are on the field at a frequency rate that we have yet to see in recent years.
Correct. When we first wanted to ask this question of our data, that was the core question. Has the rate of multiple tight end formations gone up in 2025? The answer is yes. Over 2024, it has gone up about 3 percentage points to the point where now a third of offensive plays are going to have 2 or more tight ends on the field. Compare that to some of the earlier years of the 2020s, and that's gone up like 6 to 7%. So we're seeing a market increase basically from a fourth of plays to now a third of plays will have multiple tight ends on the field, Lindsay.
Is this a trend that we're seeing top to bottom? Everyone is kind of at a rate of frequency putting out multiple tight ends more regularly, or is this like a top heavy situation where a handful of teams have gone like, we are going all in on tight ends? Like the Steelers come to mind. The Browns obviously run a lot of 12 and 13 also, but primarily 12. Is this a top heavy thing where they are making the average go up, or is this a top to bottom situation?
What I've found is that most of the teams at the top have consistently done it over the last few years. You mentioned the Steelers, you mentioned the Ravens, you mentioned teams like the Chiefs with Noah Gray and Travis Kelce. They've been doing that for years. So the real new addition is new teams that are jumping up into these ranks. The Browns are the one this year. They have popped up in particular in 12 personnel into the top of the league after not being in that kind of realm years ago. Another one is the Seahawks that has popped up. The Colts have started using a lot more 12 personnel now that they have Tyler Warren. So it is teams that are adding in rather than just teams doubling down. And so it is kind of a league-wide trend in which we're seeing this bump in heavy personnel usage.
Is it 12 or is it 13? Is it both?
I think the baseline is it is 12 personnel. It is using 2 tight ends. That being said, we are seeing a lot more diverse schemes. A great example of this, the Buffalo Bills, who have started using 6 offensive linemen, who have started using multiple backs and multiple tight ends on the field at the same time. So I think it's kind of twofold. I think people are realizing that they can get 2 tight ends on the field and maybe see different defensive looks, but they're also trying to be more personnel diverse, especially as we start to reach the middle of the season, injuries hit, and you try to get some guys in some new positions.
In terms of number of personnel plays out of 13, because obviously 13 is the one that you expect to see teams run less frequently. 3
Right.
tight ends is kind of insane. The Colts have run the most plays out of that, but the Steelers have the highest rate of plays out of that personnel grouping. 15% of their
Right.
offensive plays have been in 13, which is somewhat wild. That feels like a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes the teams that utilize 13 are not the teams that you would exactly expect to do it. You think of a team like the Commanders, Cliff Kingsbury, an air raid guy. He's been known to trot out Ertz and Sennett and Bates all in the same play. Last year, we saw the Bengals run 13 with Eric All and Mike Gesicki and Drew Sample. So it's not always these heavy, big boy, old school offenses that are trotting out 13. It's typically more strategic quarterback-led offenses who know that they can get different looks for their offense coordinator, for their quarterback, and for their skill guys to attack in order to do that.
The Steelers in particular feel like a team that we're going to need to discuss at length because they feel like the most extreme example of, like, they talked about it in the primetime broadcast about how they're kind of running 2 offenses this year. They've got
Right.
Arthur Smiths and then they've got Aaron Rodgers, and they're blended. And I think that this discussion is a really interesting way to highlight the ways in which they're blended. But let's get to that in a second. First, though, I want to talk about these personnel groupings, what teams are doing out of them. So if you have 12 or 13 on the field, I would think with 13 that the tendency would be to run, that you're putting a bunch of blockers on the field. Is that what we're seeing? That teams are running with a greater rate out of 13? What are the tendencies in terms of run pass out of these groups?
When just looking at the raw average across the league, you're still going to see the ball ran a little over half of the time. But it is a little shocking, especially
Out of
when you
13
have
or 12 or both?
when you have 2 or more tight ends on the field, you're going to
Okay.
see the ball passed a little bit over half of the time. That being said, that has slightly increased since 2022 when it was more around, 2/5 of the time. 42% of the time you were going to see a pass. Now that's getting more around the 45% mark. So it's creeping upwards over the year and teams are starting to drop back a little bit more. And so it is a little bit shocking, like even if you have 2 tight ends on the field, even if you have one of those hybrid wide receiver tight ends, teams are probably going to try to match with base or try to get a little bit more run help out there. But realistically, half the time, you're still going to probably see a pass.
Out of 13, it looks like almost everyone runs out of 13. 16 of the 21 teams with double-digit plays out of 13 run more than 65% of the
Right.
time. There are 3 outliers here, and that's the Steelers and Chiefs, who run out of 13 relatively frequently. Steelers pass the ball 52% of the time with that grouping on the field. Chiefs pass 62% of the time. And then the Bears, who do this infrequently, pass 53% of the time.
Right.
Out of 12, it feels a little bit more pass heavy for the most
And
part.
it's interesting too, because typically when we start looking at these personnel diversity that piques our mind it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing, right? We saw Ben Johnson with the Lions and Andy Reid, obviously with Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, we would expect that they are able to do this. But it's interesting to see that Ben Johnson is still throwing out of 13 a lot, despite having, a new team, a new offensive line, a young quarterback. And that's what has kind of piqued our interest. I know we're going to talk to Shawn Syed, our film expert, about this in a little bit, but it piqued my interest about why exactly these teams are doing this and what they're trying to get after. And it's really unique, especially given all the different situations of football, that these heavy personnel positions have become so key, especially in the 2025 season.
Before we get to Shawn, and this is going to be my first question for him, I'm interested to get your perspective. Do you have a takeaway, having looked at this data and the efficiency with which teams are operating with these personnel groups on the field, what they're doing in terms of pass rate? Why are we seeing an increase right now, do you think?
So there's two data points that I have found when two or more tight ends on the field that have piqued my interest. Number one is that the efficiency of the pass doubles.
Doubles?
Correct. But we're still kind of centered around 0, but we're still seeing that go up quite a bit in efficiency. And the efficiency of the run, especially when matched with a base personnel on the defensive side of the ball, actually halves. So the question becomes are teams overbearing against the run? Typically, on average, runs are already negative expected points added, meaning that when you run on average, it's not going to get you ahead of the chains. When you pass on average, it will get you ahead of the chains, but there's a wider variance. So the question really becomes for me, Lindsay, is that are defensive coordinators bearing down too hard on the run when 12 and 13 personnel are out there? And can offensive coordinators like Ben Johnson, who is kind of the leader of the snake on this one, are they trotting out multiple tight ends just to get in base so that they can pass rather than necessarily run? And I think when you look at teams like the Colts, teams like the Bills, teams like the Seahawks, teams like the Packers, who have started really doing this and really using that personnel diversity, it really seems like they're trying to get into these formations to throw the ball rather than to run the ball, which I think is very unique.
There are a few teams that you've mentioned that feel like they might be doing this out of necessity as opposed to strategically. Like there are a few groups that maybe are a little bit lacking in the wide receiver department. And so like the Browns, for instance, right? This is clearly a team that runs a lot of too tight. And they don't have a lot of depth in their wide receiver core. So you could look at that and say, this is just a way to get my next best pass catcher on the field, right? The Giants, maybe post Malik Neighbors injury. I would bet, without knowing for sure, that their rate of 12 or 13 has gone up since he's been injured. Stop Scare producer who works for the Giants is giving us a thumbs up. There you go. So it feels like in a couple of instances, this is not necessarily strategic, probably, right?
Yeah, and to a certain degree, we can bear out how much defenses are clocking that to a certain degree. And for example, you look at a team like the Seahawks, which has been very successful with AJ Barner and Elijah Arroyo on the field, and they're facing base defenses when they go with more than two tight ends about 75% of the time. The Cleveland Browns, for example, are only facing that about half the time. So I think that's a great highlight, Lindsay, in that maybe the Browns are doing it more for a reason where they just don't necessarily trust their wide receivers, or they are trying to access the passing game, and it's kind of reverted back to where people are a little bit happier playing nickel when Harold Fannin is on the field, for example. But when you are looking at a team like the Patriots, for example, who don't have any massive names at tight end, but they have very effective tight ends, and they don't really have massive names at the wide receiver position. Stephon Diggs has played very well, but is getting older. Kayshon Boutte is not by any means a star in this league. They're getting based like 77% of the time. And this is what they want to do. And as a result, Drake May is able to access the passing upside of this, and they're able to run the ball a little bit as well. And so I think there are kind of differences in how defenses respect the flip side of a heavy personnel. I think the Browns, as you highlighted, are one that people don't necessarily respect it, but
Right.
the Patriots, the Lions, the Colts, the Packers, the Seahawks, people basically have to respect their run game, and thus they're able to access the pass.
And the Browns, who have the highest rate of 12 personnel total plays, not a rate.
Right.
Well, actually, they have the highest rate also. They happen to have the lowest total EPA on these plays, minus 51 on the season. I would imagine that is just a product of the fact that their offense is generally like that's reflective of what they're
Yeah.
doing offensively in terms
Yeah.
of total EPA.
In
Not
heavy personnel, they have 284 plays. The next highest, which is the Steelers, 228. So they're running a lot more two tight end sets than anyone else this year.
And it's interesting to me, since you mentioned the Seahawks, they have the highest EPA
Correct.
in 12 personnel. And the Lions and Seahawks EPA per pass is way higher than everyone else's, 0.83 and 0.71, and the next is 0.35. So those two teams that are throwing out of 12 personnel very successfully compared to everybody else. And no surprise that it's Detroit and Seattle. Let's bring Shawn Syed in now for more on this conversation. I'm interested in getting a perspective on why he thinks this is happening, having looked at the tape through the lens that he does. All right, Shawn. So what do you think? What are teams trying to accomplish here by the increase in 12 and 13 that we're seeing this season?
Look, when you put two tight ends on the offensive formation, you are forcing the defense into a choice. You have presented 8 run gaps, those kind of areas between kind of two offensive linemen or a lineman and a tight end. If you have 8 run gaps and the defense wants to play, one player in every single gap, we now have an even box that it's 8 players in there. That means you're going to get a single high defense that offenses love, love, love to see. If you can get to consistent early down 12 personnel, play action, by the numbers, wrote about in the Stacking Scheme newsletter a few weeks back. Like it's such a ripe area to attack because we are in the world where defenses want to play smartly with 5 defensive backs on the field. They want to play this, those your cover 2s, your cover 4s, your little too high zone type coverages. So can you as an offense do anything to force the defense to now play on your schedule? And I think seeing 12 personnel, seeing 2 tight ends is a smart way to do that. Now, there are obvious upsides and there are obvious downsides, right? You're taking a receiver off the field. If you have a really good third receiver, it's going to look different. Also, not every team has 2 like real plus tight ends. I do like those. Some teams are saying, okay, my second tight end is not always winning in the run game. They're not a plus in the pass game. Let's throw a 6th offensive lineman out there. Let's make it look like a second tight end, but get another heavy body there. You saw it a bunch in this last week. Teams like the Texans now using it a bunch where you can get an extra guy in pass protection. So I've really enjoyed it. Again, it's not like, oh, every team needs to run 12 personnel on every single play. But if you're making the defense's life harder, you're getting your guys in a better situation to succeed. It's been fun to see just so many teams, getting the same exact memo and saying, all right, let's go ahead and try this out this week.
So, Shawn, let's focus in on one team that you have seen do this at an immensely high level. Who is the best at running these heavy personnels, and what do you think the core of what they're trying to get at is?
I think, best maybe a little bit more subjective because my heart is definitely stuck with the Packers, but we have to talk about the Seahawks, Sam. I mean, they run it at like a fun rate, and like running the ball itself, I think you could say, oh, well, are they running the ball too much out of 12? Like, do they need to get to more passes? Whenever they do get to passes, Sam Darnold is just throwing darts down the field that are just magically landing in JSN's hands. So I think when I look at offenses, and look, there are teams that use 12 personnel that it's not as successful. And sometimes it's because things aren't tied together in your offense. Whether it's like, okay, we're going to get into 12 personnel and we only get into 12 personnel when we run like this specific run concept and we don't run play action off it. But for the Seahawks, they're going to get to their entire offense out of that similar look. So even if you say, the Seahawks run game is not the best run game in the league, we are not going to, give the same amount of resource respect to it. We're not going to stuff that box. Still, though, when you have that kind of deep drop play action, as you get further down the field, if you can protect things up, it becomes, a one-on-one situation on the outside. So I really like teams that can also use it to give your guys a chance, give your receiver a one-on-one where defenses do a good job. So the Seahawks, I think they have to be a team that we look at when we talk about it.
Yeah, and just to fill in the blanks there, Lindsay, to the eye meeting the AI, right now they have the 3rd highest explosive pass rate. They have the 2nd highest average EPA per dropback when going heavy. And that's despite not seeing the success that the two teams ahead of them, the Indianapolis Colts and the Detroit Lions, they don't have that same success on the ground. So they are truly accessing a new part of their offense, as Shawn highlighted, while hitting, JSN deep down the field, by getting into these heavy personnel things. They're not necessarily able to get the most success on the run game. They get in these heavy personnels. It looks the same. They're able to increase their passing efficiency as a result. I thought that was really cool as well.
That's the best thing. You don't have to have a dominant run game to have a good play action game. But I think you do have to show defenses, not that like the willingness to me is less important. It's more that like things look, feel, and smell the same. So a linebacker has to step up. Like the Eagles are a good example where over the last 2 weeks, they start to get more under center. They get a second tight end. Sometimes that tight end is going to be lined up as a fullback. You go a few weeks back, they're in 12 personnel. They're in shotgun. They're running this kind of flash fake. That's not fooling anyone. That's not really pulling your linebackers in. You're not getting that effect to vacate the middle of the field. This last week against the Giants, under center. Fullback, tight end ostensibly in the fullback spot. That hard run fake just opens up all of this space. So again, to me, it's less about you need to have this awesome run game to really make the defense respect you. It's more about, are you presenting things that like feel like, hey, this is probably going to be a run. Now I can get a structure that I feel a little bit better about attacking on the offensive end.
Seahawks, by the way, pass out of 12, 50% of the time. Pass out of 13, 29% of the time. But when you go look at the Steelers, when you go look at a different team that runs a lot of multi-tight end, they pass out of 12, 62% of the time. They pass out of 13, 52% of the time. So we're passing out of multi-tight end formations more frequently than not. But what's interesting here is that the EPA is negative across the board in these multi-tight end sets. So you're putting them on the field with a great degree of frequency. You're not having relative success. But what's fascinating to me is when you go look at their 11 personnel rates, I wonder they're having a lot more success in those looks. I wonder if this is to set up that. And if that is the marriage of the Arthur Smith offense and the Aaron Rodgers offense. And almost like it becomes a little bit of disguise. Like we're going to do a lot of this to lull you into thinking that we're not going to do that. And then it makes it easier to have success doing the alternate thing, which is sort of the downfield passing. Like Aaron Rodgers, I thought was very interesting coming into this week. Don't have the updated numbers, but coming into week 8 of his last 9 touchdowns had all been 10 yards or more. But we know on the season, his ADOT is all really close to the line. So it feels like strategically you can think of a situation where you're like, we're going to do a lot of this, and then we're going to pick our moments. And maybe we're setting up those moments by all of this stuff that we're doing here that's closer to the line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the Steelers offense, when you look at it as a whole, there's just like a kind of holes in multiple spots where to me, whatever your thoughts on kind of how cohesive it is, yeah, it's still kind of a quick throw, lower ADOT offense, even when Rodgers, I think, has been able to find some success down the field. I mean, we're talking about offenses. We haven't talked about the Colts offense yet. The Colts offense is like, I wake up excited to watch this Colts offense. And part of it is because of, I think, the way they use 12 personnel, and they're able to really attack teams also on the ground, where I think a lot of times teams will put 2 tight ends to one side of the formation. You're trying to win that edge. Like you're trying to get that double team on the edge defender. Let's get a running back outside. But I mean, the Colts offensive line, that left side specifically, they are paving lanes, like massive gaps for Jonathan Taylor to run through. So as much as I love, teams that say we're setting things up for, hey, we want to get to attacking down the field, you can also use it in the run game. So that's what I think something that's been fun to see for teams like the Colts, for the Bills, although I think that was like with the fullback on the field as well in this last week, where you can also generate some positives on the ground as well. We don't have to just use it as this is our disguise to get deep throws down the field.
Is this also, we talk all the time about the league being cyclical. Everybody kind of picks up on a trend and then it pivots off of that because now everybody's got to find a way to attack the new trend with a different new trend. Is this, you guys mentioned how you want to get teams in single high. We've talked for the last few years about the increase in 2 high safety looks. Is this the answer to that?
I think it can be, a little bit, right? Because you're forcing again, the 8-man box, right? Or there's 8 gaps on the field. If you want to play even, you're going to roll someone down. At the same time, I mean, I sent Sam this clip from the Texans earlier today where the 49ers you're still playing that too high kind of cover 4 type defense. The concepts that you get to like against those types of defenses on these heavy play action looks, again, like you're getting, like a deep post curl and then kind of a post over the top of it. You're getting that cross and then a big post going in the opposite direction. You're creating one-on-one. So even if you're playing these like safe, too high, whatever sort of coverages that are like so buzzwordy, you can still make it a one-on-one. Like there are all of these clips where I'm watching receivers run by DBs. And if someone says, oh, well, they're playing a single high defense, they can't do anything. Well, I can show you all of these examples where there's 2 high safeties, they're playing back. But so can you do something to really pull those linebackers underneath and then make this like a little bit of a track meet kind of one-on-one on the outside?
Yeah, Lindsay. And interestingly, when you look at the proliferation of middle of the field open looks, it has increased for both heavy sets and for 11 personnel. However, it hasn't necessarily increased at the same rate as it has across those two. You look at 11 personnel, years ago it was run about half the time. Now it's ran around 2/3 of the time against 11 personnel. It's still kind of around 45 to 50%. It's only increased a couple percentage points despite increasing, basically 10 to 15 percentage points against 11. So I think as the trend of using middle of the field has come up, this kind of has been an anecdote to kind of keep people a little bit on their toes on the defensive side of the ball so that you can access those one-on-ones that Shawn was talking about.
Based on the things that you guys have seen and the data, Sam, do you guys think that if you were to answer simply, is this working? Is this smart? Is this something you think we will continue to see? Is this a trend to a degree? Or is this just something that we happen to have seen?
I think from the data perspective, this is something that has been unlocked in the last 2 years. If you go back and you look at 2023, 2022, 2021, when it was only used about a quarter of the time, the EPA per play was kind of in the negatives. And then I think it's a copycat league. Some of the more innovative teams started doing it in 22, 23. The Chiefs, the Bills really started to unlock this. And now that we're in 24, 25, it's really starting to pick up steam with teams like the Seahawks, with teams like the Colts. And I think when you see teams elevate their offense as a result of a decision, that indicates to me that this is something that other teams are probably going to put more in their deck unless defenses start to adjust. And so I think we probably still have a year or two more of this becoming more of the norm, this getting used more like a third of the time or maybe even higher until we really start to see defenses start to make a change, whether that's with personnel, whether that's with the defenses that they use, whether that is loading the box or not loading the box. Shawn, what are your thoughts?
I think, I guess to look at it less as like trends or like this is hot, this is cold right now. Because to me, like an offensive coordinator is a problem creator, and then a defensive coordinator is a problem solver. So offenses create all these problems. Defenses, they're just doing their best to solve it. These defensive guys have such a hard job. All these offenses get all these rules in their advantage and all this. So when I look at, okay, the defense is trying to solve this problem where we're in a nickel 5 defensive back versus 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end type league, you're going to play these types of coverages. Now the offenses say, well, how do I try and create this new problem? Get the second tight end on the field. This is what this whole discussion is about. And then I really start to think of, well, what are the defenses doing that, can work against that? One is be like the Texans and just have a bunch of like freaks all over the field where you can just play nickel all the time, or be like a Seattle where you can get into those kind of odd type fronts up front so you can still kind of mess around in the run game. So for me, it's less like a trend. It's more of like, okay, if defenses are going to do this, I mean, the offense has to respond in some sort of direction. So I'm interested to monitor. Like, I would be surprised if I wonder what the breaking point is, I guess, for 12 personnel. Because there's going to get to a point where if you're just running 12 personnel and you're not like drop back passing, or if it's always going to be play action, I have to assume there's a point where, as much as I still think, look, you can have the best play called, and when it becomes a one-on-one on the outside, you live and die by that result. And a lot of times that result, unfortunately, favors the offense. I'm curious, well, like, what's the breaking point? Because again, it's still like it's 11 personnel versus nickel on 3rd and 8. That is what it is. Like if you're in 3rd and 8, you get into 12 personnel and you run play action, it's probably not going to have that same sort of effect that you're hoping for.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think you feel like you're allergic to the word trend here. I feel like the trend is just essentially what you said. When you have something that changes defensively or offensively, things become trends because you have to react to them
Right.
strategically, right? Like, so you have body changes that have happened for defensive players over the last, I don't even know how many years. Like, we can all think of like the old linebacker with the huge neck roll, and there are these massive bodies. And then for a while, and then on the line, the big space eater in the middle that weighs like 360 pounds or whatever. And like, in the last however many years, we've gone towards much more speed and athleticism and streamlined and smaller bodies that are quick and fast and agile. And then you kind of wonder, I've always thought of Arthur Smith as somebody who creates an offense that specifically, for whatever reason, has attacked that. Like, what can these bodies not defend well? Right? Like, so maybe I run more frequently and take advantage of the fact that there aren't these space eaters in the middle. You have built a defense that is designed to get to my quarterback, and this is the way that I counteract that. That's the way I think of trends in general, and I
Well,
kind of see this as that.
I mean, that's a great way to posit it, because you think about the reason why 12 personnel exists, and it's because Joe Gibbs really wanted to stop Lawrence Taylor, like in the 80s and 90s. He just like couldn't keep Joe Theismann healthy. Congratulations, now you have 2 tight ends on the field for him to basically just run around. And so I think I like kind of both of those wavelengths about the problem creating, problem solving,
Yeah.
and then people having and wanting to create more problems and wanting to solve more problems. And I think the way that this reaches a breaking point, Shawn, is if there is a point in time in which people just are not respecting the run in 12 personnel in particular. I think you're always going to have to respect the run as you add more gaps, 13 personnel, adding 6 offensive linemen, so forth and so on. But when the negative variance of the run game, when the very small variance of the run game begins to be spread out because defenses just are not respecting it, I think that's easier access than necessarily having to drop back to pass, run play action, make the quarterback put his back to the safeties and throw it deep. Now, analytically, does that make the most sense? Probably not, but that's kind of how this game goes. It's a constant interplay. It's a constant equilibrium. And I think if we start to see the EPA per rush numbers with 2 or more tight ends on the field mirror that of when it's just faced with nickel, that's going to be kind of the equilibrium point in which people are going to start to try to create problems in other ways. Maybe that means 2 backs. Maybe that means just 11 personnel in different looks, almost like Sean McVay does. I don't know what it looks like at that point, but I think those are the numbers to look at. It is average EPA versus nickel and dime, and average EPA in the run game versus base or heavier personnels.
Sometimes I do think, what if we were in a world where, like, you only had 2 linebackers on the field, right? You're in your nickel personnel,
Right.
and you just told them, like, I don't care if it's a run fake, like, just go get to your coverage responsibility. Like, what does that actually look like? And still, then, yes, I do think you do a better job taking away some of those kind of middle of the field type routes. I just still feel like a well-designed offense is going to create one-on-ones deep down the field. No matter how much you're devoting in the run game, no matter how much you're attacking at that linebacker level, no matter how quick you're getting back. Now, I do think you can continue to hammer, okay, well, these are the kind of unique ways between the safety and a cornerback, between the cornerback on one side of the field and a safety on the other side of the field, just to deal with the routes overall. And then obviously, as you mentioned, right, you get the pendulum, and then now, okay, the offenses can actually run the ball there. It's kind of what makes football beautiful, right? Like, you have this kind of situation, who's going to solve it? And so much, Lindsay, I'm glad you mentioned like the player specifically. Like, that really matters a lot, because if you have a tight end that you feel really good about, good.
Yeah.
If you have a second one, rare occasion, but still very good. And then now you get to, okay, like, is 12 personnel actually our best grouping? Or am I removing that third receiver on the field? Just a fascinating little problem we have on our hands.
All right, that feels like a perfect spot to bring in our next guest. Thank you, Shawn. And welcome to the show, Christian Fauria, 13-year NFL veteran tight end, played for the Seahawks and Patriots and Washington and Carolina, won 2 Super Bowls with New England, and now appears on SiriusXM NFL Radio, the opening drive every Wednesday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Christian, hi.
Yes, and I would also like to add that I'm actually now a full-time professor teaching this at Bryant University in Smithfield, Rhode Island. Yes, as part of their sports studies industries majors, like I am a full-time professor now. So I am teaching the future us.
Oh,
That is
oh,
what
I'm
I'm doing.
sorry. So we just need to change this thing.
Yeah.
You are Professor Fauria.
Yeah, I should have told you guys beforehand. I really only answer to the professor, and it's usually it's hashtag the professor. I don't answer to Christian or all the stupid nicknames they have when I was younger. It's just the professor. It's weird when the students say, "Hey, professor, I have a question." I look behind me and I'm like looking for who the hell are they talking to?
I'm glad we got a professor on because we need some people to teach about how tight ends go, Christian.
Yes,
So I'm really
yes,
glad.
I am the expert you're looking for in this field.
What do you think of all these multi-tight end looks that we're seeing this year?
It's funny, like, it's not like we haven't seen it before. I remember back in, I don't even know what year was the year Mike Holmgren became the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. His whole thing was 2 tight end sets. He wanted to go 2 tight ends. He had, I want to say, I don't even know if it was Johnny Mitchell from Nebraska and Mark Tremere. I can't remember who the 2 guys were. I don't think it was Johnny Mitchell. It was another former Nebraska tight end. But they were running 2 tight end sets all the time. YY looks, even looks. One guy would be a flex. Now it's really become more of the one guy is a traditional tight end and who's normally more of a leans towards a blocking guy. And the other guy is what you would call a flex tight end. He's your undersized tight end, oversized wide receiver. And you see a lot of those body types. They're 6'4", 235-ish, 240, something like that. And the bigger tight ends, the 6'6", the 6'7" guys, which are constantly being implemented into these pro style offenses, these NFL offenses are, 260, 265, but they run 4.6. So, and then every now and then you get the guy that can do everything, but to me, it was always such an obvious advantage when I look at tight ends because most linebackers really couldn't run with the tight end, like the guy that could do it all. And if you could find a guy that you could flex out, then you were really at a advantage because like you had the height and the size against the undersized linebacker, which would back in the older days was a will linebacker, which today is now like a strong safety. Like what people call a will linebacker now is, back in the day, like it's an undersized linebacker. Today, they're strong safeties who are oversized. So, but the position has absolutely grown to be such a threat and to be such an asset that I do wonder, not that this is part of your topic, that when will the salaries kind of, be relevant to what their production is like, because sometimes the tight ends are like back there with the fullbacks. It's like, no, you need to consider them like wide receivers, as far as how you pay them. And then that's only going to come with the production and their importance and the value that they give to the teams.
I think that's such an interesting point, and it feels we've already discussed this as one of the elements to this conversation is for some of these teams, this feels less strategic and more out of necessity, like, you don't have a really fully fleshed out wide receiver room, and so the next best option is to bring on your next best pass catcher, or in some cases, maybe even, like, your best pass catcher is in fact a tight end. So it's sort of a substitute for the wide receiver, like, you are bringing on a pass catching option here.
In some ways, yeah, and I always think that whatever college is providing, that is what the NFL is going to do. They do the same thing at the quarterback position. If there's an influx of multitasking RPO type quarterbacks, like that is what is going to be in the league. If you get a bunch of pocket passers that are 6'5" that can't run, you know what? You're going to adjust your offense that way. I think of teams like Baltimore. I think of teams like the Chargers. Like I think of teams like the Lions. I mean, they're just like, this is who we want. We want to run the football, and we don't want it to be obvious that we are running the football. It used to be, some teams will not even consider a flex tight end when they're looking for a Y tight end. They just categorize them differently. But the reality is that they're so valuable in so many different ways. And I've said this many times, and I'll say it again here. After the quarterback, there is not a player on the field, on offense or defense, that is responsible for more information than the tight end. Now, playing quarterback may be harder based on, you need to be really athletic and talented, and God has to shine on you to give you certain gifts. But you're not listening to a snap count. You line up wherever they tell you to. You go tackle the guy with the ball. The tight end has to know formation, snap count. He's got to play on the left side, the right side. He's got to have motions. He's got to be flex. He's got to be X. He's got to be Z. He's got to be everything. He lines up in the backfield. They literally have to know just as much information as the quarterback. And I know this because some of my roommates were quarterbacks, and I used to test them. And I just remember going, man, I know I have to know just as much as you do. I just don't have to throw the ball. And I feel like that, like you just need to be wired differently. You need to be obviously intelligent, because there's just so many different body types that you need to go against. Forget about the volume of information. Defensive ends, linebackers, strong safeties, corners. If you're going to wham block, you got to block some big, beefy, 320-pound dude who just knows you're coming to wham block him, and he just laughs at you when you go in motion. Like, those are the type of the responsibilities, and it's not for everybody. So if you're a little bit undersized to play a traditional wide position, but you're too big and you got some physicality to you, they put you as a flex, and they put you in the backfield. You run corner routes out of the backfield just like a tailback would or a fullback. So there's a lot of jobs out there, is what I would say. There's more opportunities. Usually it would be, we may have two guys in our tight end room, and then one guy was a practice squad guy that was never, ever going to see the field, but it was just the two of us doing everything. Now you may have 5 or 6 guys in that room, which shows that the position has evolved.
So when you have those 5 or 6 guys, how is the practice time getting broken down? And if you are a practice squad guy, or if you are a true Y, are you spending more time with the offensive line working on blocking and the guys that are spread out, or is everyone doing the same thing? How does the practice time get broken down?
They literally pass you around like a pack of smokes in prison sometimes. They just keep passing you around. Like, we would just work with everybody. We would, it really, time management is key, because you would have to work with the tackles on combo blocks. You would have to work with the quarterbacks on pass protection. You would have to work with the receivers coach or the offense coordinator on blitz pickups and coverages. And then you got to hurry up, and you got to create some sort of relationship with the quarterback so he's willing to throw you the ball. So I remember my practices that if they had those tracking devices on you back when I played, we literally ran around more than anybody. Offensive line would be way over there. Hey, one-on-one drills with the linebackers. Let's run all the way over there. Oh, okay, now we got to do one-on-one and 7-on-7 with the quarterback. Sorry, now we got to go back over there. So you're constantly running, you're constantly competing, you're constantly adjusting. Listen, that's just the beauty of the position. Like, it just really is, very unique in my book. And the guys that play it, in my opinion, are the best athletes on the field. Now, I mean, that's, you put them on a basketball court, they may dunk on you left and right. But you want to really find an untapped pool of resources, go to the college level and look at some of these power forwards like Antonio Gates and Tony Gonzalez. Like, it's the same body type.
I feel like, so for the chunk of years leading into the last few years, it feels like what we've become accustomed to at the tight end position in terms of the influx of pass catching tight ends has been primarily 11 personnel. You've got one main tight end, like your Travis Kelce, maybe a bad example because they actually run Noah Gray out a lot. But usually there's one guy that is the primary guy. And like George Kittle, perfect example, very good at blocking, very good pass catcher. You kind of have to check all of the boxes at a high level because you are the guy that they're putting out there. If you are a team that is very frequently trotting out 2 or 3 tight ends and you're running a lot of 12, or like the Steelers with a lot of 13, can you have types of tight ends? Like, you are more primarily a blocking tight end. You are more a pass catching tight end. And then my next part of that question is, how low can the bar go on the thing that is not your strength? If you're a pass catching tight end and you're not really known for your blocking, how good do you still have to be to just be on the field?
Yeah, there's a lot of answers there for that one, and and I could tell you, like, when I got in the league, I was known as a blocking tight end, and then a pass catching tight end, then a guy that could do both, and then back to a passing tight end, catching tight end, and back to a blocking tight end. It just depended on it really literally depended on where I was. But each team, so they'll always have what you really want is one guy that can do everything, right? One guy like George Kittle can do everything. He's one of one. So if you want to, if he's flexed out or if he's off the line of scrimmage, you have a less of an idea of what he's doing because you like here comes the blocking tight end, right? And the blocking tight end was traditionally some bigger guy that couldn't really run. But he was a decent athlete, and they would put him in obvious running play. And even if they ran play action, you weren't. It was like whatever. He ain't going out for a route. And if he does, like you don't know, no issues tackling him because he can't run. It's just been a little bit more blurred. I think, if I could say that, there's most of the guys can do everything. Most of the guys, unfortunately, are required to do everything. If you are a team that has a fullback, what happens if the fullback gets hurt? Guess who's taking his spot? We are. Okay. If you're the flex tight end, that's the one position where I would say this guy isn't really doing anything. Even watching Travis Kelce the other night, I'm like, he's not blocking anybody. And he's not like gonna road grade anybody, but he doesn't need to. He doesn't need to be some set the edge power tight end. He just needs to get in the way. And if he's willing to get in the way, he'll be good enough because arm tackles don't work in the NFL. And I saw him pull around on like a counter. I was like, I can't believe they're pulling him on a counter. It doesn't seem like he wants to get his hands dirty, but he does. People used to rip Shannon Sharp for not being able to block. Shannon Sharp was a good blocker. He wasn't great. He didn't need to be great. He just needed to be, willing to do it. And he's as strong as anybody. Tony Gonzalez got a bad reputation for that as well. He was a really good blocker. He wasn't the best I've ever seen. He doesn't need to be. He's catching 100 passes a year. Like, if you're an idiot if you're using him just to block.
Right.
There's this excellent kind of marriage of what you're saying and what the data is saying, because what we've found is basically what you've said is that using a tight end as a run blocker, typically you don't have to be the best run blocker, and it still opens up the pass, particularly when you're in those heavy sets. In your experience, can you kind of feel that when you were going on with other tight ends or when you were lining up in line of the linebackers, the safeties, getting ready, gearing up for a run, and thus you felt like you had an edge kind of by design in the pass game? Or is it more of a matchup thing? What's kind of your thought process on why it's so much better in the pass game?
I would marry all my run plays with my play action passes. Like I was constantly thinking about how to marry a certain look with another complementary pass off of that. I was constantly doing because I'm literally trying to influence them. I'm trying to trick them. That's the whole idea of play action pass. I'm amazed they don't try to get rid of that like the tush push. No fair trying to trick us. So, those two things should absolutely be married. And because you want it to look the same, you want them to be influenced the same. And then when you do have a run play, you want to take advantage of them thinking it may be a pass, or maybe they just pause for a second and you get the advantage of getting the right position. Like, because all this stuff happens so fast. If I can get them to freeze for just a second, I'll have the high ground. I'll have the leverage. I'll have the position, right? Because I know I want them to go. I don't want them to go underneath me. I want them to go over the top. And even if I miss my block, at least the guy has to run backwards. Therefore, the back, just by the way he's running, he's going to get 2 extra yards before he even gets hit. But I would say I love it when quarterbacks go under center, and they do a lot of play action, right? They marry it. They old school Peyton Manning it. It's a hardcore long handoff, right? I saw Caleb Williams doing that the other day. I was like, wow, man, he's really good under center. Well, of course he is, because, DeAndre Swift was like running all over everybody, and now they're freaking out about it, and now they have to honor it.
Yeah.
But if your run game sucks, it doesn't matter how many times you run play action if they don't honor it. So, long-winded answer, I'm sorry, but like if they have to be married together.
Mhm.
They have to be.
It's so interesting, all this talk about play action, because what the data has told us for a number of years is that, well, these conversations have happened outside data circles, that it doesn't actually matter how good the running back is or how strong the running game is. It's the threat of it happening at all that gives play action the real strength. The data seems to support that. And I wonder if the same isn't true for the blocking threat of the tight end. Going back to the question about how good, where is that bar of like how good a blocker do you have to be to get on the field? One would imagine that there is still a bar there, but it like the threat of putting that person on the field as a potential blocker, even if you are more frequently than not going to be used as a pass catcher, might be enough to get what you need in terms of the defensive looks.
See, I would like the data is always interesting because I always wonder, where does the data come from? What are they looking at? So I will say that if the data says it doesn't matter who's in there, if just the idea of a run fake will get people open, I don't buy it, because I've been in so many situations where the defense has called out a donkey route, and a donkey route would be when the defense would literally make a sound of a donkey, signifying that nothing's going on over here. This guy isn't doing anything. Tendencies matter, personnel matter, your history matters. Like if you're a defensive player and I can't block and I get my ass kicked, like, yeah, I mean, you're just not going to be as nervous, I would say. And you look at the down and distance, you would look at the offense's tendencies, and you would already have the information of what they usually do and what they don't do, and you just wouldn't buy it.
When you're thinking about how the defense is approaching it, like when the tight ends are added, it adds those extra gaps, right? And the defense has to remain gap, they have to keep gap integrity. When you are in there, can you feel the bite of the linebacker a little bit?
Absolutely.
Which is kind of that's typically what we see in the data, interestingly, is that there's always playing aggressive. They're always trying to remain gap integral. And I think that's why that play action shows up in the data the way it does, is because you're forcing them to think about more. Does that make sense? Is that kind of your experience as well?
It does, but I'll give you another example. And this is why I think it's just I look at it differently. Because what bugs me is when the offensive line doesn't show run fake. It drives me crazy. They step back. I'm like, you guys, because they're nervous about getting beat, and they know it's a pass and they don't want to overreach, and then they get beat knowing that they have to back up. Like, I need them to sell it. So because that's why I think, it is an interesting conversation, because if I'm play actioning without a route, I'm firing out like crazy. And always used to bug me that I would see the offensive line like just giving it away. I guess is my point. Like, don't give it away. You have to sell it, man. I need your help because I want them to either freeze or step up.
Right.
Just for a second, so I can either get behind them, right? Get that little pass right there. Or if it's a void that I'm looking for, like, it's easy for me to find it. So maybe it's not an exact science. I don't know. Like, I always have this personal beef with data sometimes based on just, life experience. And even though the data will probably say one thing, I'm like, well, back in my day, that's not how it worked.
Yell at that cloud, Crickman.
Yeah.
This is apparently something you should have spent more time coaching them up on when you were running to the offensive line unit, like a little acting class. Okay, I'm here,
That's the
and I got some cuffs that I'd like to address with you.
Here's the thing. They don't care about us. Like, that's the thing. This is why I love the fact that you always felt like you really didn't have a group, right? You had like the offensive linemen, they have numbers. Like the receivers have their own little thing. Like the tight end group, we would inherit a fullback. Like nobody wanted them either, you know. And so it's like, where's like this, the island of misfit toys in a way. I used to always hang out with the quarterbacks. Like that was the quarterbacks and the linebackers. The linebackers, you have a similar mentality, workout style, body type. You're always kind of interacting and I would always make sure the quarterback was my best friend, like always, even if I didn't like him.
I mean, every good pass catcher should
Yeah.
approach
Yeah,
things
you
that
should. But the receivers, they're so diva-ish. They act like they don't need anybody. Like we need the quarterbacks to know that we need them. They're like
There you go.
they're like important to us, So just in case they may throw us a bone.
Wide receivers and quarterbacks can have like a stare down of a power struggle. You guys,
Yeah.
I'm not too big. I'm not too big.
Getting in the middle of it.
You one last question before we let you go. I want to ask about just draft evaluation. And if we're moving in a direction where we've got more tight ends on the field more frequently, if this is something that we continue to see flushed out for the next couple of years, how do you think that changes the way that we should evaluate tight ends coming out of the draft?
It's talking to coaches who draft tight ends every year. I got a bunch of my friends who are tight end coaches or they're scouts. And some guys won't draft a flex tight end, like we talked about. They won't draft a tweener. They only want a traditional Y, and they'll find somebody else to have that position. I think it's always going to come down to, like the obvious things, which are the speed and the strength. But even then, it's like some of it doesn't matter. Like one of the best blockers I've ever seen in my life was one of the weakest people I've ever seen. It was amazing, and he was just good at it. But he was just a decent receiver. So as far as evaluating the
Where's that?
draft, I can't say. He's like one of my better friends, and he'll kill me if I call him out because he'll call me out.
I mean, man, you're giving him a
complimenting
compliment.
him.
You're saying he's the best run blocker you've ever seen.
Yeah, he is one of the best, but he's not gonna like the fact that I ripped his hands. But because I could definitely catch better than him. That's for damn sure. But I don't. It's interesting. It's a great question. Like right now, colleges will bring out some of these teams. They never huddle. They don't even ask their tight ends to block, but they catch 50 passes. Like Harold Fannin, for example. Okay, great example. I studied him, and people looked at his catch totals and thought he was a flex. He's just a soft, oversized receiver that only cared about catching the ball. When I watched this film, I was like, I watched him play against Ohio State. I was like, this dude's physical. They just don't use him to block, but he mixes it up. He's real aggressive. He had good hands, but they wanted to throw the ball 120 times, so he caught like 100 plus balls. He's doing great right now. Cleveland has him playing fullback. They have him wham blocking. They have him blocking front side. They have him blocking backside. I looked at Colston Loveland. I was like, I mean, he's a good blocker. He's not great, but he can do all the outside stuff. Man, there's just so many of them.
What about Gadsden from the Chargers?
He's a flex to me. Okay. He's a flex. However, he's in a system where they value blocking. So if he's not willing to get his hands dirty, he limits what they can do with them. Like Harbaugh wants his tight ends to block. Same like Mark Andrews. Like you got to block. Isaiah Likely. Like you guys got to block. Because it's just too big of a part of their offense. Even like George Kittle and Tongas, the guy in San Francisco, you got to do both. So it is interesting. I think it just depends on what style of offense you are running will dictate how they value or how they view the draft.
I'm still shocked that the Chargers haven't run out more 12 with the way that they built out their tight end room. That was I was like, so you're collecting tight ends now. Their GM comes from Baltimore. I was connecting all sorts of dots this offseason. I'm like, you draft Gadsden after you bring in Conklin in addition to Will Disley. Like, I thought all the writing was on the wall, and they're just like, nah.
Who is the guy? Because I was watching them, like they have this big, like former defensive lineman. That's what the Harbaughs like to do. Like he was like playing tight end / fullback. I can't remember what his name is. They had a couple guys. Even the Patriots have this guy. His last name is Hoover. He's like a H-back is what I would call him. He plays tight end and he plays fullback, right? So he's like more of a odd combination. But I know what you're talking about with San Diego, with the Chargers. Yeah, and maybe who knows? But you're right. Like
Maybe that's the wrinkle to come.
yeah, we'll see. They're all still evolving. I would say in another 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, you always use Thanksgiving as that pin, right? To kind of figure it out. Like you plant your flag at Thanksgiving, then you know exactly who they are, what they can do, what they can't do, what the personnel can do, what they can't do. And I'm curious to see what the data says about Gadsden front side runs. How often is he front side solo? No help, no why, no nothing. He's front side edge setter. I doubt it's high. I could be wrong though.
We'll have to go look that up.
Good luck finding that stat. That seems hard to find.
Oh,
We got it.
You can do it? Are you
We're gonna
say it to me? You got to say it to me.
I will.
I would really like to know who has the most reps, and it's probably George Kittle. Okay, a most front side runs. Okay, where they run the ball to him with no help, right? No help. I'm wondering who that is. That's the typewriter right there. That position. The guys that can do that. That's the fax machine. Those guys. No, there's not any of those left.
challenge accepted. We're going to go
Okay.
find that. Our data scientist, Sam S, is going to prove his worth to you after this conversation about data. Christian Fauria, you can hear him on SiriusXM's NFL Radio on the opening drive every Wednesday with Solomon Wilcots from 7 a.m. until 10 a.m. Eastern on channel 88 and also on the SiriusXM app. Just search NFL Radio. Thank you so much for your insight.
Yeah, you're welcome. Or you can see me at Com 405, Com 403, or Com 331 at Bryant University. You can check out the website. I don't know what kind of school you're looking for. I mean, I can be your teacher.
I gotta tell you, like, how incredible to have that type of program in college. I want to take all sports broadcasting related. Everything that I always took was always just broadcasting.
Yeah, no, I know. We're narrowing it down to specifically just sports and sports broadcasting, just everything that we do. So you see, now that I've done you guys a favor, I will ask the same in return as you speak to 35 Bryant University students, trying to teach them the ways of the business, which is, as you know, changing, evolving. But there's lots of room for everybody. Yeah, right. There's lots of room for all of us. So
Yeah, give me a call. I'm
I will.
happy to be a guest speaker. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, guys.
All right. Well, that was fun. Sam, you have been given some homework. I'm going to let you go dive into that data there so that we can maybe turn Christian around on the data front, impress him with your ability to find these numbers. While you look that up, I wanted to circle back to the point about play action that we were making there. And I think we kind of touched on it a little bit there about what we're talking about is the threat and the way that the threat of a run positions the defense in a certain way that is beneficial for the passing game. And the example of this year, I would point to the Seahawks. The Seahawks have the second best EPA off of play action. But when you go look at the run game, they have the second worst yards per rush attempt in the NFL, 3.7 yards per carry, and the third worst EPA on run plays. They are also, however, third in running back rush attempts. So the whole story here is they don't actually run the ball very well, but they do it a lot. And that seems to set up everything in their offense well. So again, circling back to that, it is the threat of the run that is leading to the efficiency metric being what we're looking for, not the actual success in the run game, meaning you don't have to have the best running back. It is just the simple act of threatening to run the ball that puts people in the positions that they need to be in order to have a little bit more success. Did I explain that okay?
Yeah, you explained that great. And ironically, speaking about the Seahawks in particular, as the data comes back, the way we filtered it to use our data, and you will be able to do this soon in Sumer Brain. And the way that you would query this in Sumer Brain is you want to understand when tight ends are aligned on the same side as a run play, when does that run play hit, or the C and the D gap? So around the tight ends, they're basically, the intent is to run at or behind the tight ends. The tight ends, obviously, as a result, have to make a key block. So that's what we're
We
looking at
trust you.
here. Yeah. Number 1, AJ Barner of
Ooh.
the Seattle Seahawks. So what we're starting to see here is a trend of what the Seattle Seahawks are trying to do. For the record, if we just look at it as the teams, the number 1 team who runs behind their tight ends is still the Seattle Seahawks. And mind you, AJ Barner is also number 1 in our SumerScore run blocking scores for tight ends. So what this story is telling me, Lindsay, is that while they have kind of tried to rebuild this offensive line, they haven't really been able to get it going. They've kind of found a element in which, they can run behind their tight ends. Their tight ends are pretty good at blocking for their running backs. And even when it's not successful, they're still able to turn that into successful pass plays by creating that kind of question, by creating those bites from the linebackers, knowing that guys like Barner and even Elijah Arroyo, who we talked about weeks and weeks ago about basically lining up at X quite a bit.
Yep.
Even he is like in the 50s. He has like 18 to 20 of these snaps. And so it's very interesting that this team has identified what we talked about today, using multiple tight ends, using play action, using their tight ends to block, even if they may not be the best blockers in the world, like Elijah Arroyo isn't necessarily, in order to free up that pass game and cause questions for the linebackers and safeties. And it really seems like this is going to be a focus for the Seahawks now. It's going to be a focus for them as they continue to fight for the NFC West title.
Don't you love it when a whole story just full circle comes together and
fantastic, Lindsay. Makes our jobs a lot easier.
Do you want to circle back, because the guy who actually prompted that question from Christian was Oronde Gadsden from the Chargers. So what do the numbers say about the number of times that they run to his side? My guess is that Christian doesn't think they probably are likely to be big numbers.
Yeah, they are not doing a lot. There have been 12 plays that have hit in the C or the D gap in which Oronde Gadsden was lined up at the tight end around those gaps. He is 81st in that total number. So he is well down the list.
Okay, so we're going to have to work on that.
Correct. They are not really attacking him as a major part of the run game.
Okay, so following up on that, is that a problem for them moving forward? Because he's been a revelation in the passing game these last couple of weeks. I mean, clearly there is something to work with there. That's why they drafted him. He's a converted wide receiver. Like, we knew that was the strength there of his game. I wonder if they are putting him on the field and then not running to his side. And we know that they're not running to his side, if that's something that defenses will be able to pick up on. Or, like we said originally, if it doesn't matter because the threat that they can, because they have periodically, is all that really matters.
Yeah, I think it's the almost opposite of AJ Barner, right? Where AJ Barner is considered their blocking tight end and Elijah Arroyo is their receiving tight end. But AJ Barner has been able to get free a lot in the red zone. He's been fantasy relevant for several weeks now because of his run blocking. It's the opposite for Oronde Gadsden, where he's a weapon when he is lined up wide. You have to consider him as a threat when he is lined up inside. As a result, that may cause some interesting new revelations from Greg Roman and that offense of lining him up inside, maybe using play action to get him deep, putting him in a little different idea of maybe getting the back end to rotate to him to open up runs away from him. There's all kinds of things that they can play with. So I think that Christian really set us up in a really good kind of spectrum of, here's a guy who can pass receive really well, and thus you can use the threat of him pass receiving to allow better things for your run. On the flip side, AJ Barner is a guy who can run block really well. They use him a lot in the run game. As a result, they use him a lot in the red zone to free himself up to make big plays when they're down there.
We talk a lot about team building. I love team building. I love roster building conversation. So I want to go back to the point that he was talking about with regards to the value of the tight ends. And if we continue to go in this direction, do they get paid more for the time being? The way that I think it's interesting to look at that is the fact that we know that they're not getting paid much. So relative to wide receivers. And so from a team building standpoint, if we're putting more tight ends on the field, and if you have the ability to put tight ends on the field like a Gadsden, who are good pass catchers, and you know that you're going to pay them so much less than that third wide receiver on average, then I wonder if this isn't a brilliant way to build out your team. Add a lot of tight ends and have somebody on the field who can be your blocking tight end. And now you can maybe afford to put a tight end on the field who is not as strong of a blocker. Gadsden, perfect example, apparently, and let them be an extra pass catching option. Because when you go look at the prices here for tight ends, there are 15 tight ends that are making $10 million a year. Let me tell you some wide receiver names who are making $10 million a year. We've got Tutu Atwell, we've got De'Ami Brown, we've got Josh Palmer. So we are talking about wide receiver threes here, right?
Yeah.
So if you can do that and you can add let me just add one more quick name here. Christian Kirk's making $18 million a year this year. The top 2 tight ends make 19. You could have Trey McBride or you could have Christian Kirk. Which one you want?
Yeah, I definitely would want Trey McBride. And I think this comes down to a grand issue, which we talk about a lot, Lindsay, which is like the third wide receiver problem. Can you get a quality third wide receiver on your team? And as we continue moving, you start thinking about the third wide receiver on some of the best teams in the league. The Eagles, probably Dallas Goedert. And that's why they play with Calcaterra and Goddard so much. Jahan Dotson, they did spend draft capital on, but in terms of just sheer salary, is not, breaking the bank. You think of the Chiefs, you think that how much Noah Gray is on the field. I mean, Noah Gray is never going to be paid like a top flight tight end, but they've been able to get success out of him. You think of Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid with the Bills. You think of Josh Oliver and Hawkinson on the Vikings. I mean, like, you can start ticking them off, and it really feels like this could be a market efficiency that has, to a certain degree, already been jumped on by the best teams, particularly when you have a great quarterback, and probably should continue to be jumped on as we continue moving down the journey that is the National Football League in the next couple of years.
Does that have an impact on draft value, positional value?
Yeah, I mean, like, draft value, surplus value will always go as the market goes. And so the implication would be that the free agency market would have to go up at some point. And ironically, like, we saw this years ago with Jimmy Graham, where Jimmy Graham was going to have the franchise tag on him. And he argued that he needed to be paid as a wide receiver because he lined up more as a wide receiver. And he ended up getting traded to the Seahawks. And that's what ended up happening with the Saints franchise. But the real question is like, how are front offices valuing this on the open market? And until we see someone start to push those numbers up, a la an Aaron Donald at the defensive tackle position, all of a sudden the defensive tackle position is now premium, a la a Trey Smith or a Joe Tooney or some of these other guards who have now started to be more highly paid. At that point, then we will start seeing teams feel as if that they can utilize those picks on tight ends. In the draft, it's a little bit stickier, because I think we have seen a couple good first-round tight ends, but we've also seen Oronde Gadsden all of a sudden be a starter, and who's like a day 3 pick. We've seen Sam Laporta be a second-round pick and outperform several people in the first round. And so I think it's a little bit more of a crapshoot. And so it's a real mix. I mean, I liked how Christian really broke down how the tight end position as a whole are tweeners in the space of the locker room. And I think in contracts, they're tweeners. On play-by-play and schemes, they're tweeners. Things that they're asked to do, they're tweeners. And I think that's really the case in team building as well, where if you can get 2 good ones, you're not going to have to pay them, and you can really cause a lot of problems for these teams.
Harold Fannon's making 1.6 a year. Just looking at some of these examples here of, I think you used the perfect word, market inefficiencies.
Correct.
Good stuff. All right. Well, that was an interesting conversation about the tight end position. I know that it'll force me to look at some games a little bit differently this week. Sam Bruchhaus, I'm Lindsay Rhodes. Thank you to our guests, Christian Fauria and Shawn Syed. We'll be back again next week with the trade deadline going live on Tuesday. 4 Eastern is the deadline. Everyone who's going to be traded is going to be traded prior to that time. And we'll be on live to walk you through all the moves that were made.